Hello, my name is Scott Mandia. I am a full professor and assistant chair of physical sciences at Suffolk County Community College, which is located in Long Island, New York. Today I'm creating a YouTube video to share what I think are best practices for teaching a fully online science lab course, although this is heavily weighted towards the lecture portion of the course, so I think it would be useful for teaching really any course. I've been teaching this online lab science course for a few years now, and each semester I do it, I learn something new and it gets better, so I figured I would share that with you all, especially given the pandemic situation where many of us who maybe haven't taught online before or sort of just were thrown into it mid-semester now have to start from scratch. And if you want to teach a fully online asynchronous course, I do have some helpful items for you here. So here we're in one of my sections that I'm teaching in the summer course, MET 101 Introduction to Weather, 4-credit lab science course. And I'm going to first talk about the layout. I think it's very important for your layout of the course to be organized. And so what you'll see over here is the things that students are going to see the most often, like announcements, obviously, or the information that's very important, like how to get help and how to contact. These are all going to be right up here in the top. Okay, now I can go into student mode here so you can see exactly what students will see. It's often very good to switch back and forth to see what they're going to see. And so they're going to have announcements, they're going to see how they can contact me. Obviously the course outline is always important. Because my course is writing intensive, there are links to the Writing Center. We're going to talk about this how to study a little bit later on. Okay, you'll also notice that I have a section called Getting Started, right? I have a section called Community, and I have a section called Schedule, as well as down here, helpful information in order to complete the labs. Okay, so we're going to go into the Getting Started right now. And I think one thing before I continue with that, you'll notice in the schedule that I have the due dates listed for each of these weeks. So this is an 8-week course. That's a summer course, so it's a bit compressed, an 8-week course. And I think it's very important that you put due dates everywhere, because the biggest mistake I see students making in the online environment is they're just not carefully reading everything. Reading is, even though this is a science course, I tell my students reading is the single most important skill you can have in this course. And so I have due dates right where they see the assignment. And then of course if you click on the assignment, boom, due June 19th. So you have to just constantly remind them of when things are due. Okay, and the other thing too is if they say I didn't know it was due, you can say, well, there were 15 places where it told you that, for example, in the outline and whatnot. So it kind of gives you cover also. Okay, so let's go to what I call the Getting Started page. I think it's very important that students know up front what they're getting into, because I think a lot of students will sign up for an online course thinking, hey, I can take a course and not go to school, and they don't realize that it actually makes them become the teacher and the student at the same time, and it's really more for independent learners. Now, of course, with the pandemic, they may only have the option of online, and they really didn't want that modality. So I think it's incumbent upon us to make it as close to the in-class experience as possible for those students. So I usually open up my course a week before classes begin, and I tell them to absolutely go and look at the things to consider. And you'll see I have a dressing room here that has, definite, maybe, no way. And so they click on this and they basically read that here's how much time you should be expected. And what I show them is that if you were in my class twice a week for 15 weeks, that's basically 15 one-hour sessions of face-to-face and then outside of class studying. So basically you should be studying 10 to 20 hours per week of a 15-week semester. And of course, if it's the 8-week format, then you can double that. And then I have something that shows them, are you the right type of learner? So can you actually work on this each day? Are you able to carefully read and follow directions? Do you take good notes? And then this is a biggie, are you comfortable with technology? So I'm amazed by the number of students who sign up for a fully online course who really aren't that skilled with how to do email and file attachments and save documents in Word, or if they use a Mac, how to save it in a PDF so anybody can see it. So I think it's important for them to understand they have to have some of those skills. And then after I'm done scaring them with the first few slides, I'd show them that, in fact, online also can be better, right, than the traditional environment. Here's why. So I think it's important for students to know that it's a different modality. There's a certain set of skills they must have. But if you are that kind of student, online is actually better, right? So, for example, even joke here and say you can actually take your phone to the beach and study your Met 101. Of course, we know that they're never going to do that, but at least plants that seed, right? I also find that as much as possible, if you can put an image in with each slide, something visual for them to look at, I think that helps a lot. Okay, so let's see, I have my little note sheet over here. Okay, let's go back to the regular mode here. So as I mentioned before, it's nice to have sections for your navigation. And you may be wondering how I was able to get these little subheaders in here: getting started, community, schedule, and the dividers. If you go up to the top here, there's a little plus, okay? And then when you click on the plus, you choose subheader, okay? So the subheader might be, beach studying, all right? Beach studying, and then hit submit. Okay, so now when I scroll down, right, there's beach studying. See how it's a header? And then I take my little crosshair and I can drag it up. And let's just say I want to put it above schedule. So I drag it up and put it right above schedule, beach studying. And then if I want to put a divider line in there, I can hit divider. And then once again, you go down to the bottom and you take your divider line, you drag it up. So beach studying, right? And then anything that you, I'll move this up one more. Anything that you want to do here as far as related to beach studying, then these are all now going to be learning modules or folders or whatnot. So it's actually very easy to basically almost make your left-hand side look like a table of contents. And these are sort of the main chapters, and then these are the things in between. So now I have to get rid of beach studying because that was just to show you. So I will say yes, delete the menu item. Are you sure? Yes, I am sure. Okay, and then now I'm going to have an extra divider line there, so I'm just going to delete that. And again, it's pretty easy to make these subheaders, and I think it really keeps things organized. That's one thing when I've polled my students at the end of the semester saying, what's one thing I'm doing well in the course, what's one thing I'm not doing well, and they like the organization of the course. Okay. Okay, so we did the things to consider. All right, so now the question becomes, once we have sort of our subheaders here, what's the best way to sort of give them the information? Okay, so I'm going to go to, I'll click on week 2 temperature here. Okay, and what you'll see is this is called a learning module. Okay, so, when I first started doing Blackboard, I was doing everything as folders and items, and this page became very lengthy, and you had to scroll everywhere. And then I learned when I did the eLearning Academy that you can do these things called learning modules. So now in the learning module, it's the one page, everything is embedded within there, which you'll see in a minute, and I have my learning outcomes. So students know right away, if I study the right way, these are the things that I need to know before I take the quiz, okay? So you'll notice when I click on, let me go into student mode here. I'll click on temperature. Back to week 2. Okay, so I'll hit temperature. When I click on it, you'll notice now that these are all of the slides that I have. So if I were doing folders and items, these would all be a bunch of items and it would make the page get very long. If it's a learning module, everything is contained in the left-hand side and each page is unique. I have some text, I have some pictures, and then the students would hit next. Now I get the next picture in here, right? And then they would hit next again. So it's almost like you're turning pages in a book. So instead of, when you use folders and items, it's almost like the entire book is one huge long page as you have to keep scrolling. When you do learning modules like this, you actually get all of the different pages sort of in a chapter format, and then just the page they need is going to show up on the screen. Okay, so now when I first thought about designing this course, and I'll be honest with you, if you do the course the way I've done it, it's a lot of work. I probably spent a few hundred hours building this. It's almost like writing your own textbook. So for those of you who are watching this YouTube video, you can take whatever you want from it, little pieces. Don't assume that between now and a month and a half when the semester begins, that you're going to be able to do all of this stuff. There's just not going to be as much time. But at least you're thinking about it, and then as the course is running, you can be building this stuff. So, again, if you do these online courses the right way, they take a lot of time to set up. The nice thing is once you take the time to set up, it runs so smoothly. And I think it really does help students become far more successful and feel like they really had a real course, like if they had come to class. And it wasn't just somebody's notes stuck up on the web. They feel like they get their money's worth, I think. Okay, so what I wanted to do with the lecture part of my course was I imagined, what do I have to do to sort of recreate the face-to-face experience? So I sort of, for each of my topics, I kind of replayed in my head exactly what I would be doing in the classroom as if I were a student watching myself teach. And so I made a mental note of, where do I stop and give examples? Where do I stop and ask students questions and get some feedback? Where do I throw in the bad joke, that kind of thing? Where are the parts that I know that are always the sticky parts, things like that. So I think if you approach your course as you're trying to pretend you're a student watching yourself and what would you want to see, I think it will help you build the course the right way. Okay? So one of the things I've done is you'll notice if you go through these modules that every couple of slides I have a question. Right, so here's an example of where I turn off all the lights in the room and I tell my students, pretend all the tables and chairs are gone, and I ask you to walk around, and every time you bump each other, make a comment. I'll record the number of collisions. Then I have them running around, and I'm trying to get them to understand how kinetic energy is related to temperature. So I then on this say, what do you think is going to happen if I do this? So if X happens, what's going to happen to Y? And they think about it, then they go on the next page, and they get the answer, right? So the idea is this forces students to stop, to think about the concept that's being developed, try to come up with an answer, and then they go to the next page, right? So if you have a learning module approach and each page is sequential, it kind of sort of forces them to move along sequentially. And the other nice thing is that they can kind of bounce back and forth in here when they're studying. They don't have to go, for example, I can click right to page 10. I don't have to go forward if I don't want to. So I think this learning module is probably the best way to go. So let me show you how to do a learning module. So I got to get back to teacher mode now instead of student mode. Okay. So now I'm going to show you how to make a learning module, just like this thunderstorms and severe weather. Okay. Let me get back out of student mode here. All right, so thunderstorms and severe weather. So what I want to do is I want to first click Build Content, and then I want Learning Module. So Build Content, Learning Module. Okay, and I'll just call this Test Info. Okay, and then in here you can describe it, blah, 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 blah. You can also set enforce sequential learning. Do they have to go in order? I don't like to use that because if they want to poke around when they're studying, that makes it a bit annoying for them. I always track the number of views, and if you want, you can choose when it's displayed and when it's not displayed anymore. So I hit Submit. Okay, so now I have Test Info. I click on that, and now in order to build the individual pages within this learning module, I do Build Content and I do Module Page. Right, and so I'll just do something like Lab Test Examples. And then I might put some things to do with the lab test here. I hit Submit. And now what you will see is I now have, I'll go back to here. I now have a learning module called Test Info. Students click on it, and every page that's within Test Info is now going to appear in a table of contents. It's nice and clean that they can scroll through. Okay, so again, I think learning modules with module pages inside of them are a much better way for students to learn. It's more organized. They can click through. They're not getting hit with too much information on the screen. They're not seeing folders and items all over the place. So I do think That is the best way to do it. And I can tell you, when I first started Blackboard, I was doing folders and items. This is so much better. It's kind of like shoveling snow. You do that for years, you finally get a snowblower, and you say, oh my gosh, I can't believe I ever was actually shoveling this stuff. When, you know, that kind of thing. Okay, it's weird I'm giving a snow example in the middle of summer, but all right, so let me delete that so my students don't think there's suddenly new information here. Panic. All right, so that's done. Okay, so that's how you make learning modules. You will also notice that when I was going through these temperature slides, for example, I have to go back to student mode. Right, so temperature is one of my concepts, one of my weekly concepts. So I click on it, and as I told you that every couple of slides, I do a Q&A. Okay, right? And I always think, if you can, inject some humor or something that humanizes you. So for example, one of the examples I give in my traditional class is that the reason the bonds are different between solid, liquid, and gases is what makes them in different states. And I always use an example of my dog, you know, holding the leash, having an extendo leash versus just letting them go and say squirrel. So I throw a little picture of my dog in there, right? How cute is that, right? So again, students, you know, they want to be entertained if you can at times. I think it keeps them interested. So don't be afraid to, you know, throw a joke in there if that's your skill set. I'm famous for bad puns, so I do throw them in there. All right, so what you'll notice is I did the Q&A here, and then I hit next. Okay, I'm going to do one more till I get to a little bit more Q&A there. I got to remember where my YouTube link is. Okay. I forgot which slide number my first YouTube is in here, because I want to show you something here. Okay, that always blows their mind, how an iceberg has more heat than a hot cup of tea. All right, so what you'll see here is I have this link called View on YouTube. Now, the program I'm using to make this YouTube video right now is called Camtasia. You might be able to get a license for it. When I first designed the course, I used a laptop from the library that has the software loaded. But even if you wanted to buy it on your own, it's about $180. It's very nice to have because, for example, today I decided I'm going to make this YouTube video to help my colleagues here and anywhere. Now that I have this Camtasia program, I can actually create this YouTube. So what I've done is, now the students can read my notes and they see my pictures and I do the Q&A. Now when they click this view on YouTube, because I've used software called Camtasia, they actually can hear me.
Hopefully you understood why a cup of tea has a higher temperature than an iceberg, but an iceberg has more total heat, total energy, which we call heat. So let's do a little experiment here. What I want you to do is find someone who loves you and have them sit down and say you want to practice your temperature versus heat that you're learning in your one-on-one online course.
So I will spare you the rest of that, but the nice thing about this Camtasia video is now every so many slides I have a link called View on YouTube, and they actually can watch me and hear me going through the slide. So other than seeing me, it's like I'm right there in class. The only thing that is really missing the way this is designed is immediate Q&A. But students are getting the notes, they're getting all the images, they're getting sort of a text Q&A, and now they're getting a YouTube video where they are hearing me and watching me teach them these slides. And the nice thing about the YouTube video and having these slides is that they can go back and take as much time as they want. Students who have weak note-taking skills, well, I've taken the notes for them in a sense. It's right there, and they can go at any speed they want. Whereas if they were in class and they didn't raise their hand, I might not know they were confused, and I might have moved on. So people have asked me, you know, what do you think is better, online or traditional? And I think, honestly, if you do it the right way, the lecture course online definitely has some strong advantages. I still think face-to-face is still the best because you can read body language, you get immediate feedback from students, you can kind of see their eyes and whatnot. But if you do the lecture the right way, you really are getting awfully close to the in-class experience. And I think for students who are maybe a little bit slower taking the notes or afraid to ask questions, this is probably better for them in this format. Okay? The labs, on the other hand, I think are clearly much harder online. You definitely need to be in the room if you can be, but we'll talk about that after. Okay, so I strongly recommend that you get Camtasia and record these videos. I had a student just this past weekend had a question about something in the weather forecast, and I thought, this is going to take a long time to explain by email, so I just quick crafted a YouTube video, a 7-minute YouTube video showing her about the maps that she was asking and how to solve that problem. And then you can end up putting these things in an archive for other future students to learn. So I think there's definitely some advantages there. Okay. All right. So when I do the lecture, at the end of the lecture, so let's go. We're currently on thunderstorms. At the end of the lecture, okay. So we go down to the bottom here, and you'll see there's a quiz. All right, and then there's a discussion. So the idea is after they've learned all the notes, they're going to have to do a discussion, and they're going to have to take a quiz. And they give them 1 week for everything. Everything is due at 8 a.m. Friday, and then the next week opens at 8:01 a.m. Friday. Okay? So I know a lot of faculty are concerned about students cheating. Probably the quiz is probably the easiest way for students to cheat, so I just make it 10% of the grade. If you make the questions unique enough, it'll be harder for students to cheat. I also do randomize the order of the questions, and I also do randomize the answers. So A, B, C, D is not always the same. Number 1's not always the same. You can make a quiz pool, and you can have 20 questions, and then the Blackboard randomly chooses 10 out of there, so students actually are technically taking slightly different quizzes. There's a lot of different things you can do, but I find that I grade the writing part of the course more points than the test part of the course, because the writing part of the course is much more difficult for them to try to take advantage of something. Okay? So every single week in the discussion, okay, I'm going to ask the same questions, right? So we know the research shows that when students do things, you ask them to keep doing things and it's repetition, that it reinforces the neurons in the brain. So if every single week they're answering the same questions, just on a different topic, they start to quickly learn what you need as a teacher, what they need as a student to be successful. So these are my questions. What did you find most interesting and why? Okay, so they usually will find something in there that, wow, I didn't really know that. That's really cool. And so it makes them value the information they learn. What surprised you, right? And there's always something in weather that surprises them. Oh, I didn't know that toilets don't spin differently in Australia, right? I've been lied to all my life. I didn't know that tires don't keep you safe in the car. It's the metal, things like that, okay? And then one of the things that students have often said, and I've been teaching at Suffolk for 28 years now, actually, is, why do I need to know this? I'm an English major. I'm a history major. I'm an accountant. Why do I need to know this? And so I always tell them, this course is a vehicle for you to become a better member of society, right, to learn. And I'm just using meteorology as sort of the content that I would teach the same way, even if I were doing geology. I teach the same way if I were even doing history, for example. I want you to be able to solve problems and think. But there really are concepts in all the courses we teach at Suffolk that everybody can use somewhere. So number 3 is, what's something you've learned that you think will be useful after you leave the course? Right, so they have to actually sit down and think about, obviously with thunderstorms, everybody needs to know about thunderstorms, the temperature topic, I get answers like, oh, from cooking this, or if I'm painting or whatever, it depends on the temperature, that kind of stuff, right? And then I say, okay, not just for you, but how would some members of society, what professions might actually use this? So they understand the value in the concepts that they're learning, have value for society in general. And then number 5 is sort of what a lot of educators would call the muddiest point. What, if anything, did you find confusing, and how did you try to decrease the confusion, right? And then that's their initial post, and then they have to comment on 2 other students' posts, which are called threads. So it forces every student to essentially write something that everybody in the class will see, and they have to read other students' posts because they have to comment on at least 2 of those posts. All right, so now I have here, we want to go to the rubrics for this. So for example, I'll click on discussion, up here, discussions, there we go. And so for example, this week it's thunderstorms and severe weather, it's an assignment. Okay, so I have 3 students who've already done one. It's actually tomorrow at 8 a.m. is the deadline for the maximum points for something I call timeliness. But anyway, so you'll see here, students have something called grading information, right? So you click on grading information, and this is a rubric that I have built for my students, okay? And so this shows them how I'm going to score their posts. It's the same rubric for every single week, so they really become comfortable with sort of mapping out. So the idea is, if you want to have a good discussion, you need to let students know what you need from them, right? So I don't use pages, I use number of words. So I tell them, if you want the maximum score under number of words, 500 or more words, and then it goes down accordingly. Timeliness. Are you giving other students at least 3 days to respond? The reason why you want to have something called timeliness in your discussions, if, like for example, everything in my class, the deadline's 8 a.m. Friday. If you don't have a timeliness category, guess when you're going to see everybody throwing up their posts? That's right, Thursday night, sometimes even Friday morning. How can you have a discussion if students have had 3 hours to actually try to read and comment on it? So I reward students for turning it in early. So basically, if I assign it on Friday 8 a.m., they have until Tuesday morning. If they post something Tuesday morning, even if it's not even that good, if they post it Tuesday morning, they've now given the class 3 days to read it and comment, they get the maximum score. And then each 24 hours down from that, they start to lose points, okay? Quality of post, right? So again, I will send this rubric to anybody who wants it. I have it in a Word PDF format. And so this shows students, you know, are you actually really educating the reader? And most importantly, which I'll get into in a little bit, are you reaching Bloom's level 4 or higher if you want the maximum score? That's probably the hardest thing for students to do. I've managed to pretty much almost get all of them to consistently do Bloom's level 3, which, trust me, takes some work. Most students are living on levels 1 and 2. And of course, we want them when they leave college to be able to do 4 and above. So 3 is getting there. Clarity of writing, you know, spelling and grammar. And then I also have a word count for number of comments, because if you just say, oh, you've got a comment on 2 student posts, you'll get somebody writing, great post, awesome post, boom, 2 comments. So you basically now are forcing them to really carefully read other students' posts and then write their comments. And what's really neat about that is students who put their posts up and then somebody writes a nice lengthy comment, they actually think, wow, they really liked my post. They read it carefully. I mean, it's kind of like if you're an author and someone goes out and buys your book and writes a nice comment on Amazon. So I think this really fosters community when you have students really helping other students in the discussion and commenting, saying, hey, I never thought of that, you know. So it's the old imposter syndrome, I'm not that smart in this course, and then you have one of your student colleagues telling you, wow, I never even thought of that, you know. So they start to feel like, hey, maybe I'm pretty smart, right? So the way I have it done here is they have to comment on at least two student posts, and again, there's a Bloom's category, okay? So the idea here is this replaces sort of that in-class discussion. It would almost be like you would teach something and then say, okay, 15 minutes, guys, have a conversation and we'll talk. Or if you're using Zoom, this is kind of like doing breakout rooms where you give them something to talk about and students start talking to each other. I really think students will learn much more when they learn from other students, even more from the faculty member. Okay? So if you're going to require students to have a certain level of thinking, it's called, you know, Bloom's, right? You want to show them how to do Bloom's. So I have a link here called How to Study. Okay, this has taken some time. It's evolved. But basically, I have a web page that basically is designed to show students the best way to study. I have a picture of Bloom's taxonomy here. And again, you can see that most of them are memorizing, so they're getting to either Bloom's level 1 or 2. I really want them to get to analyze, which is much easier to do in a lab because they're analyzing data. It's harder to do it in a lecture. Just trust me on that one, that lectures, it's easy to go 1 and 2 and a bit easier to go to 3. 4 and above is tough, but it's not impossible, and I've been doing it. But again, this is why I think the lab component of courses is so important, is because they're clearly level 4, right? And then I thought, hey, this would be pretty cool. So I have 3 YouTube videos, right? So initially when I did this course, I just gave them this pyramid and said, read it, basically, and I tried to talk a little bit about it. Now I have videos. So for example, this first video, and you guys, anyone who's watching this video, sorry for the ads, anyone who's watching these videos, I will send you the links.
Bloom's taxonomy is a toolbox that teachers or students can use to classify and organize learning objectives. Its most popular version is based on the cognitive domain and assumes that learning should be structured.
Okay, so that video is more from like a faculty member's point of view, right? And then I have this one here that I found at LSU. This one, you get a student talking about Bloom's as they represent each level. So I thought that was kind of cool.
The Center for Academic Success presents Bloom's Taxonomy, a classification of learning levels. It maps the way we think and process information. The levels of learning are remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. The lower level
course has several new concepts, terms, procedures, and functions that you need to remember and understand. Once you have a solid understanding of the
right, so that one, they actually teach Bloom's, and then they have a student talking about how she uses it in her classes. And then my favorite one, especially for your Harry Potter fan, so this person designed, she took snippets of different parts of different Harry Potter movies to show how the level of thinking in these situations Harry Potter got into were Bloom's level 1, 2, 3, 4. So I think this is kind of an interesting one. Whoops, I hit mute. See? Understanding.
I make my move.
Right? And so they go through each level of Bloom. So I think that's kind of fun. And then I decided that students still were struggling to get to Bloom's level 4. So I found this nice little graphic. And I want them to get to analyze. So now I show them that these are sort of the verbs, or these are the things you'd be thinking about in order to get to Bloom's level 4. So are your thoughts and analysis? Are you comparing and contrasting 2 different things? Are you composing an argument? Did you defend a position? So I always try to get them to think of those words. Again, you got to help them get to Bloom's, but once they get there, they know how to do it. And it does take a little bit of time, but they will get there. And the nice thing is, if you have that rubric every week and you have those same sets of questions, they figure it out. They really do figure it out. Trust me, when they do those discussions the first week, it's almost like they're sending a text message or a quickie email to a friend. By week 3, now it's like a mini paper. I mean, they really realize the difference between a casual conversation and actually critically thinking and trying to educate the reader. But you got to help them get there. I also have this study cycle. What will happen is students will email me and they'll say, oh, I'm not doing so well. Is there any advice you can give me? And I'll say, look, have you looked at this? And we'll talk about it. And I said, these are the best practices, right, for trying to learn the material. And there's even time limits on it. Here's another one that shows you plan, study, break, recap. So I said, keep doing that kind of stuff. And one of the things that I always try to tell my students is that in order to get good at something, you have to practice. So I asked them, how many of you practice, shooting free throws? How many of you practice a musical instrument? How many of you practice by drawing, whatever? And there are hobbies. And I ask them, why do you practice so much? I say, oh, because that's how we're going to get better. Like, well, then why do you expect to get better if you spend 1 hour a week in a class? Right? You would never expect to start hitting 80 to 90% of your free throws if you practice 1 hour a week shooting a basketball. So I think when they kind of make that connection that it's like anything in life, if you want to get good at it, you got to practice. This gives them the roadmap in order to get there. Okay, and then one of the neat things that I've did is that if somebody in the first week comes up to Bloom's level 4, right, and I tell the class, hey, there was one of these posts really met Bloom's level 4, I'll give everybody an extra 10 points on their own post if they read all of the comments from all the posts from students and they try to guess which one had Bloom's level 4 and why. Send it to me via private email, right? And so any student who sends me that email and guesses correctly is going to get the points. And then, of course, if they guess wrong but they have some decent arguments, I'll give them some extra credit because they did submit something. And then the student who wrote the 4, obviously that person knows who he or she is, so I just give them the points. But it forces them to go back and actually look at one of the colleagues in their class and say, oh, now I see why that person was Bloom's level 4, why mine wasn't quite there. So again, anything you can do to get them up there is definitely going to be helpful. Okay? Or as the instructor, when you're in the discussion format, you can prod them to try to get it a little bit higher. So for example, I had one student write last summer, I was surprised. My sister went to Ecuador in the summer and she complained about how cold it was. And so I said, that's kind of odd. How come do you think it was cold? Because she didn't take it that one step further. She said, oh, I guess she's south of the equator. It must be winter. I said, well, it is in the tropics, and as we've learned, there really aren't seasons like winter and summer. It's pretty warm everywhere in the tropics. Why else might it have been cold? And she couldn't come up, and I said, look at a map of South America. And she said, oh, there's a lot of mountains there. Ah, she must have been really high up. Yes, even if you're in the tropics, if you're thousands of feet up, it's going to be cold. So you can do that as an instructor. You can try to get them to that sort of level 4 thinking. And one of the tricks I've often used is when students have actually asked a question in their post, like, hey, I was kind of wondering if this happened. I say, answer your own question. If you answer your own question, you're probably doing level 4. You're analyzing, comparing, contrasting. So these are the little things you could do to kind of get them up there. And once they figure it out, then they're pretty much Bloom's 3-4 every week after that. Okay, but they just need a little bit of help. Okay. Now the last thing I want to talk about with the discussions is I had everything due Friday 8 a.m. So I was crushed on Fridays grading dozens of basically mini papers, and you got to get them back right away. You can't really wait in the online environment because if you want them to learn, you have to get it back right away because they're going to immediately start working on the next discussion. So I was basically buried on Fridays and Saturdays. So what I did was I realized, wait a second, a lot of students are submitted things by Tuesday because that's how they get the maximum points in timeliness. I could probably partially grade these as they go along. So what I did was I made up this little sheet. Let me go to my... Okay, so for example, this particular... All right, so you can see I put my student names in here, okay? These are the categories in the rubric. I have word count, timeliness, the Bloom's level, how's the spelling and grammar, comment words, number of comment. And then, so student 1, as soon as they submit their discussion, right, as soon as they submit their discussion, I write in this little box the word count, right? And I do 4 of these because then one piece of paper lasts for 4 weeks, so it's a way to save paper. Timeliness, were they on time? Do I tick off a box because they were posting it on Wednesday, that kind of thing, Bloom's level and so forth. So by the time Friday morning rolls around, anybody who has submitted things before then, I already have a lot of it mostly graded, right? So this is a way to sort of grade as you go, right? Now, the comments, you really have to wait till Friday 8 a.m. because students can comment up until the deadline. So their initial post is going to be much earlier. So about half of what you need to grade is going to be done earlier, unless they're posting late at night. Okay. So let me just back that out. Okay. So I think that pretty much covers the lecture portion of the course. These are my best practices. As far as the lab, that really depends on what course you're teaching. My course is a weather course, so all the data is on the internet. So I was already doing the lab online, just they were in class on laptops. So that's why my class was very conducive to being the first fully online lab science at Suffolk. But I think the main thing with whatever labs that you do is, as much as possible, have tutorials and explanations. Have a section over here dedicated just to the labs. Okay, so I have all these tutorials that I've used Camtasia, and then as you keep doing this course, develop what I call a lab FYI, in this case forecasting FYI. So I had a bunch of students saying, I know we do a different forecast for a different city each week. How do I find the city? And I just assumed students would figure out that they could just go to Google and type in Dayton, Ohio, and they would see a map. But so now I actually made a YouTube showing them how to use Google to find, right? This is a data sheet that they have to look at every week. I highlighted these are the rows and columns you actually have to record. The rest of them are extras. You don't have to actually put them down there. Here's what your sheet should look like before you have to look at maps, for example. I have examples of what it's supposed to look like, right? Because my data is real-time data, I post lab data on Saturday and Monday, so there's one weekend lab and one weekday lab. They get to pick which one they want to do. Some people like to do their course on the weekends. Others, the weekend is sacred. They want to do it on the weekday. So I actually do 2 labs for myself every week. They only have to do one, and I have 2 answer keys. So I show them that, if you want to do the Saturday or Sunday data, here's how you save the maps. So once the maps are saved, then you're good, because the maps change every 24 hours. But if you save them, it's like having a historical case study. I show them how to save the maps, things like that. And then basically every time I start to see common mistakes, I start building a common mistakes avoiding page and whatnot. So the idea is always have some kind of a lab FYI and just keep throwing stuff in there that is going to help students. It's like a little archive of helpful information. Okay, let's see. I think that actually might do it. So my email address is mandis, M-A-N-D-I-S, @ sunysuffolk.edu. Let me just put this in here in Word. Large font. Okay, so if you have any questions about anything you've seen on here, we're all trying to achieve the same thing. That is to try to get our students to become better learners, and also to try to offer courses that are as good or better as the traditional in-person course, especially given because we don't know exactly when the whole pandemic mess is going to be over. We may be doing these types of things for a long time. Okay, so again, I have a lot of stuff here. It's taken me a lot of time to build. I've been teaching this course for several years, so don't think you're going to be able to build something like this in a couple of weeks. If you are, then you're a show-off, and I'm jealous. But it's like anything. Just take things that you've learned from here and try to start putting them in your class. If you can't quite get it done by fall, be already building your spring and make the spring better than the fall and so forth. So you can benchmark. And again, I'm hoping that the way that I'm running this will work for even somebody who's doing an English course or history or accounting as far as the lecture. Okay, the labs are definitely the sticking point. I have an advantage because weather data is live. But again, I think this is scalable for any class. Okay, I hope you find it informative.